I'm Mike Quackenbush, and for the last 30 years, I've been living and loving the pro wrestling lifestyle, both in front of the cameras as a wrestler, referee, ring announcer, and commentator, and also behind the scenes working as a promoter, booker, agent, coach, consultant, and a bunch of other things too. And what I have compiled for you today is a compendium of insider tips and tricks, secret hacks, and brutally honest advice that I have collected across my decades in the business, and I'm going to share it all with you. It's a wide-ranging conversation covering topics from the insults that wrestlers sling against one another to that ever-hot topic of the secret wrestling handshake. And I want to start it all off by covering some really common fears that wrestlers experience. I know that I have, and I've got a good indication maybe you have too. If my comment section is any indication, this common fear is one that's been plaguing several of you recently. It is the fear that you can't master the mechanics. And you might know I don't teach in-ring mechanics of wrestling on this channel for a very good reason. One, it does seem like it's begging for a lawsuit. Number two, I believe that wrestling's in-ring mechanics need to be learned in the ring, under the supervision of a qualified coach, not through a YouTube video. But I do have two insights about learning mechanics that I want to share with you. So point number one, I'm going to choose as an example, flip bumps, because that's the one I've seen mentioned most often down in the comments section. Let's say you are struggling to master the flip bump. If you've been going at this for 8 weeks straight and you have either plateaued or you're seeing no progress whatsoever, I want you to take a break from training for that technique and shift your focus in class to something else. And that might mean you have to have a conversation with your coach, but explain to them you are being intentional and strategic about what you're doing. And once that focus has shifted in class, when you're not in class, you're going to get good at analyzing the technique you're struggling with. So in this example, flip bumps. Let's say you want your flip bump to look like Montez Ford's. So here's how you are going to go about analyzing Montez Ford's flip bump. I want you to start by looking at his feet. Does he come off of one foot or does he come off of both feet evenly when he jumps into the air? How much bend is in his knees? How low does he have to sink to launch himself? What does he do with his arms to help with his rotation? Then take a look at his chin. How long does he hold his chin up so that he aims his entire body on an upward trajectory before he must tuck his chin in order to take the bump? And I want you to study as much footage of, just for this example, Montez Ford's flip bump as you can possibly find. And then I want you to move on to the second point I want to make about learning physical mechanics. I want you to begin visualizing yourself doing what you've just studied. Picture yourself at practice doing the thing you've just analyzed, mimicking those movements with your body. And consider this training your brain to produce with your body the result that you want. If you go at this seriously for any period of time, I really do believe you're going to experience substantial progress the next time you tackle it in training. A second common fear centers on the idea of risk versus reward, or as I often hear this one phrased, it's an anxiety that I won't make it. And in order for us to overcome this, we have to answer a couple questions like, what is making it to you? What is the reward that you're willing to risk for? In other words, have you defined success in pro wrestling for yourself? It doesn't need to be what someone else's definition of success is. What would success look like to you? Because if you haven't defined that yet, you're unlikely to recognize it when you achieve it. And I want to share this real statistic with you because it's got to be part of the conversation. Less than 1% of all working pros all around the globe will ever wrestle at the corporate level, meaning WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, AEW, etc. So, if part of finding success in wrestling to you means plying your trade at the corporate level, you have to factor that less than 1% statistic into your personal risk versus reward analysis. This next one is not only really common, but it's really powerful too. Believe me, I know. It's the fear that because you dislike public speaking, you'll never get good at cutting promos, and this will cripple your pro wrestling career. And a fear of public speaking is very common, but you can overcome it if you're willing to wade through a bit of discomfort. Know what I mean by that? The very first time you get called on to stand up in front of your training class and cut a promo, that might make you a little bit uncomfortable. Not just the first time, maybe the first 50 times. But if you can wade through that discomfort, over time, you'll become more comfortable cutting promos in front of your class. And if the prospect of even that seems too difficult to bear, I want you to use this hack, which I think will serve you well. For promo class, I want you to invent a character you know you will never portray in the ring. It's what I refer to as a disposable character. And I want you to only inhabit that disposable character when you have to cut promos. It won't be you cutting the promo, it will be this disposable character. And I want you to do that until you feel as if you have gotten past the most uncomfortable part of this process. At which time, I want you to feel free to crumple up that disposable character and toss it away. Because once you've waded through some of that discomfort, you no longer need it, and you're ready to be challenged at a higher level. This next fear strikes a lot of working pros, including yours truly. It's that anxiety we all feel about returning to the ring after a hiatus and the effects of ring rust on our game. And take it from a guy who knows that first day back at training is the worst day. Those bumps are gonna feel rough. You're gonna wonder, what's wrong with the ropes today? Why do they feel like this? You're gonna get that blown up feeling. For me, it makes me feel like my legs are wet spaghetti. And you're gonna have to suffer through that for a few weeks to get up and running again, but you will get there. But respect this fact if you're returning post-injury. It is possible that what your 100% was before the injury is no longer attainable. A complete recovery may not be possible. Just as an example, some years ago, I shattered my leg wrestling in Secaucus, New Jersey. And the reality is, I have never fully recovered from that. What represented 100% to me before that accident, I just can't get there anymore. Maybe I'm at 90% of that capacity, but that 90% has become my new 100%. And don't spend time obsessing over whatever it is that you've lost, like that 10% that I never recovered. Just work to the new 100% that you are capable of. And let's be honest, even at 90%, you're still probably worlds better than most of the people out there bumping around. You're gonna be fine. It's possible that by the time you are having even your first few matches in the ring, you will have developed Wrestle Brain. And if this is a brand new concept to you, please allow me to break it all down. Wrestle Brain is what happens when you speak all the languages of pro wrestling fluently. And the end result is that you can process things, like just as an example, a long chain of moves or counter moves, a spot made up of 17 different elements, a storyline with beats which will play out over the course of a year. You can process those things almost instantly. Because you have such a firm grasp on the mechanics, performance, and structure of all things pro wrestling, you have a certain realm of expertise. And anything that falls within that realm of expertise can be understood and processed more quickly by you than by an average human being walking around the earth. In a broader context, broader than just wrestling, this sits neatly alongside the neurological phenomenon known as the curse of knowledge, sometimes referred to as the curse of expertise. You know what I mean by this? The curse of knowledge is a mindset in which the person who wields the expertise does not adequately communicate with people who do not, because they don't remember that other people haven't gone through that same journey. They don't have that same level of expertise, or they just forget. They assume everyone around them can process information at the same speed that they can. And once you cross that bridge, it's almost impossible to come back. Once it's turned on, turning it off is very difficult. It will irrevocably change the way you relate to and communicate about pro wrestling. And if you have Wrestle Brain, there are some dangers you need to be cautious of. Just like the curse of knowledge creates blind spots in the minds of experts in biochemistry or copyright law, so too does Wrestle Brain create blind spots for us as professional wrestlers. And this surfaces when we are communicating with others. We forget that they may not possess the same level of expertise that we do. And that might mean that they have different passions than we have. It might mean that they have focused their interests in other areas. It might mean that they're just a little bit further behind in their journey than we are in ours. But there are 3 circumstances in particular I want to call out in today's video just to get you thinking a little bit about your own Wrestle Brain. Before we explore those 3 scenarios, you might be thinking, Mike, how does one even develop a case of Wrestle Brain? Well, I can tell you how it happened to me. Once I started to see the nuts and bolts underneath the moves and the spots and the characters in wrestling, and I understood the choices on the parts of the performers as well as the creative team that got to that end product, I was basically done for. It's akin to seeing the great and powerful Oz walk out from behind that curtain. You can never unsee it. And from that moment on, my default setting has always been to watch wrestling with my analytical goggles on. It's been virtually impossible to put my fan goggles back on and enjoy professional wrestling the way it is presented. And I feel a certain sadness about that, about what a struggle it is to watch wrestling solely for enjoyment. I have to make a conscious effort to put my fan goggles back on, and it really only works when I go back and revisit the wrestling I enjoyed most when I was younger. By the way, if what I've just described sounds a lot like you, leave me a comment down below and please tell me what the moment is when that switch got flipped in your brain. Now, I want to talk about the 3 areas in which Wrestle Brain can really trip you up, even if you are in your apprentice phase. Ready? Here we go. There is no area where I see people getting tripped up more often by Wrestle Brain than when it comes to the pacing of matches. You have to remember, your brain will process all of that mechanical wrestling information, things like transitions and escapes and spots, much faster than the average person's brain, because that is your realm of expertise. And your understanding of it, it exists at a level that, generally speaking, is not available to wrestling fans. Unless they've experienced some degree of training, or the regular viewers of this channel, I guess, they're never going to have that level of expertise. And if you want to make sure your matches and performances are appreciated by the paying customers, which I kind of think is our job, you need to slow the pace down when you're being very intricate with movements. I'm not saying there aren't parts of a match that shouldn't be fast. There are. But what I'm saying is, give some consideration to the average ticket holding fan who can't possibly process reversals at the same rate that you can. It's our responsibility to make the match for them. I really do believe if you're designing a match and it is only to please yourself, that is a masturbatory exercise. And that's not what professional wrestling is about. It's about pleasing the customer. This second one is one I've been guilty of getting wrong more times than I care to admit. It's when we are inserting a spot or a moment into a match of ours based on its imagined equity. Now, there's all kinds of ways you can build up value into various finishing moves or character rituals in pro wrestling. That is equity, that built-in value. Here's an easy example. There is so much TV equity built up into the sharpshooter that it will get a reaction in practically any arena around the world based on its television equity. Since it became Bret the Hitman Hart's finishing move back in 1992, that move has been fairly well protected on TV for decades. A lot of TV equity has been built up into that. And if this weekend you happen to put a sharpshooter on in the middle of one of your matches, chances are part of the reaction that we'll get from the audience is due to its TV equity. But sometimes, when we are possessed by our wrestle brains, we imagine that our realm of expertise is everyone's realm of expertise. So you might think calling out a spot from that great match back in January between Ospreay and Okada at the Dome is going to get a massive reaction because everyone will know that you are winking at that spot, when the reality is maybe a couple of the guys in the locker room will get it, and maybe that one fan out in the audience is going to get it. But other than that, people are not going to know that spot. It might have a lot of equity because this is the thing you are expert in, but remember, we're not making the match for ourselves, we're making it for all of them. Give consideration to the fact that your realm of expertise is not everyone's. And this last one might be the most important over the long term, so listen carefully. It's important to mind your wrestle brain tendencies when you are communicating with a relative rookie, someone who is a little further behind in their journey than you are along yours. Yes, they may know the vocabulary of the job, but that doesn't mean they process things as quickly as you do. And speaking from my own experience, when I was a rookie, difficult though it is at times to remember that far back, the truth is I was often embarrassed to admit when I did not understand something or I did not know something. And this was because I was afraid of being mocked. I didn't want people to call out the fact that maybe I wasn't qualified to be doing the job that I was hired and in the arena to do that particular night. So I kept that ignorance to myself. Many rookies do the same thing. They will agree. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you get this? Yep, I get it. And then they walk away and they start to have a mini panic attack because they have no idea what you just said. So have some consideration for the relative rookie that you are working with. They probably don't process things as quickly as you do. So do them a favor and downshift into a slower gear for them. If you're hearing all this and you're like, oh yeah, I realize it now, I have wrestle brain big time, let me offer you this one bit of parting advice. When you are done discussing the what of a match, these are what the moves are going to be, these are what the spots are going to be, and then you drill down a little further into the how we are going to execute them, how we are going to perform them, don't skip over the why. You have to elaborate upon the why. Take that time and explain the psychology, the reasoning, the underlying tenet or principle that has led you to make these decisions. Understanding the why unlocks people's comprehension in a way that the what and the how never do. And when we are afflicted by our wrestle brains, we often forget that not everyone possesses the same level of expertise that we do. A long-standing tradition of pro wrestling culture is the handshake. And I don't mean just any old handshake. For over 100 years, pro wrestling has had its own secret handshake. But to understand its origin, we have to go all the way back to the first of the 4 eras of pro wrestling, the Carnival era. Back then, this secret handshake, which looked firm, but in reality had no intensity, no pressure, no squeeze to it whatsoever. This was a method of workers indicating to each other who's on the inside and who is on the outside. And back in that era, when money was frequently bet on the outcome of matches at pro wrestling shows held in a carnival context, it was extremely risky business to openly discuss things like which money is going to be bet on who and what the predetermined finishes might be. It was a method of protecting the secrets of professional wrestling. The secret handshake said, I know what's up. I know it's a work. I know the finishes are predetermined. And conversely, if someone just came up and shook hands like a regular Joe, that might be a signal that we're all going to be very careful about what we disclose while we are in their presence. The secret handshake back then was sort of the key to going behind the kayfabe curtain, so to speak. Before I go any further, if you're learning something from today's video, please leave me a like-a-palooza down below. It helps the channel to grow. Now, let's fast forward a few decades into the second era of pro wrestling, the territory era. And here, the secret handshake carries forward all of its carny connotations while growing to take on a new meaning as well. This one, a light as a feather handshake, tells a fellow professional what they can expect from you later on that night in the ring. It says, I'm not stiffing you here on our first meeting, nor am I going to stiff you later on when we meet in the ring. I'm light. I'm light. I'm not some bag of bricks. It's an indicator of what the work is going to be like later on in the night. And it's a symbol of trust. It's a silent contract between two working pros that is sealed with a barely there handshake. Even in the territory era, there are some pockets of working pros who begin to discard the tradition of the secret handshake because they feel as if it's a relic from a bygone era. While at the very same time, there are countless regional variants of the handshake that begin to blossom. I have met some old-timers who only do the shake with the top two fingers on the hand, and I've met others who only do it by applying pressure with their fingertips, never with the meat of their palm. The late great King Kong Bundy had showed me how he likes to cover up his worker handshake by placing his second hand over top in case any outsiders happen to be around observing it. And I know plenty of others who like to mask what they're doing with their secret wrestling handshake by putting it in the middle of a very tight bro hug as they are doing it. And if we fast forward a few more decades, we land in the third era of pro wrestling, the cable TV era. This is the era of wrestling when I broke in. And while the secret handshake still carried all of its previous connotations, it continued to take on new meaning at that time. When I was breaking in, that secret wrestler handshake was a signal which said, I have been properly trained. And someone who walked into a locker room and started squeezing people's hands really hard would often get a roll of the eyes from a seasoned veteran. In fact, that's the first context in which I ever heard the phrase, a victim of poor training. A dude that squeezed people's hands hard in the locker room were often remarked to be victims of poor training because no one bothered to teach them the wrestler handshake. And beyond my own experience, I've heard of other meanings that the handshake took on. I recently heard Arn Anderson articulate what it meant to him. He said that a wrestler's handshake was a sign of trust, that I'm not going to hurt you in the ring. We can trust one another while we're out there. And if you have shown up to work today with an injury, I am skillful enough to work around that injury so you are in no worse condition when the night is over. And I happen to think that's kind of awesome. If you've stuck with me this far, you might be wondering to yourself, Mike, what about in Mexico or in Japan? Has this tradition of American carnivals migrated to other key wrestling hotspots? And in my experience, the answer to that is no. Only Mexican or Japanese wrestlers very familiar with American wrestling culture have adopted the secret handshake. And removed from that, remember that American Carnival era wrestling had minimal impact on the development of lucha libre in Mexico and virtually no impact on the development of pro res in Japan. Each has its own culture and its own traditions therein. When someone ignores the time-honored tradition of the introduction and the handshake, this never goes unnoticed. And sometimes it can lead to conflict, either in the locker room or maybe later out in the parking lot. So let's examine every facet of getting big-leagued. Let's start with the most obvious part, shall we? What does that phrase even mean? What does it mean if you are getting big-leagued? Well, to me, getting big-leagued is when you are blown off, when you are ignored by someone who imagines that they are such a massive global superstar that they no longer need to bother showing common courtesy, professionalism, or respect to some far lesser star in the world of professional wrestling. That's what it is when someone else big leagues you. They treat you like you are beneath their notice. And yeah, this has absolutely happened to me. More than 10 years ago now, when I was NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion, I was wrestling on a card in New Jersey. I was defending that belt against this fabulously talented Swiss wrestler. I wonder whatever became of him. When an old-timey veteran who had last been relevant in the 1980s big-leagued me in front of the entire locker room. Even though we had met dozens of times before, I got up to shake his hand and say hello, and he completely ignored me in front of everyone, even to the degree that another veteran in the locker room called him out and yelled at him with some rather colorful language we don't present here on YouTube for doing it. And I just stood there with my hand outstretched, looking like an idiot. Just so there's no misunderstanding, let's more neatly box in the definition of getting big-leagued, shall we? So let's flip the pancake over and imagine a scenario in which you are at an event alongside Stone Cold Steve Austin. And throughout the event, he is so busy, constantly being swarmed by people who need a moment of his time, that when you go to introduce yourself, you get slighted in the buzz that's going on around Steve Austin. Is this an example of getting big-leagued? In my opinion, no, it's not. He's just a really busy guy. That example actually just made me think of a real event from my own career. Back in the 1990s, I was booked on a show with Dan Severn. And this was in an era when he was dividing his time between the UFC and professional wrestling. In addition to which, I think he was launching his own brand at the time called the Danger Zone. Regardless, the entire time that he was at the event, he was getting phone calls left and right. He had all kinds of business transactions that he needed to be dealing with. He did not have a moment to himself until it was time for his music to play and he had to go to the ring. Does that mean in some way, shape, or form that Dan Severn big-leagued the whole locker room? No, I don't think so. This was just someone who was very busy having a really busy day. Sidebar. May I tell you a quick story about Dan Severn, please? At the very end of the 90s, Dan and I happened to be booked on the same card down in Texas. And on this particular evening, I suffered one of the worst injuries of my entire career. Long story short, a metal spike went into my forehead and tore me open to behind my ear. So basically, like a giant flap of my scalp was loose. It was bloody and gross. I could not finish the match, and they just whisked me off to the emergency room as soon as it was possible. So I spent all night in the ER being put back together, but I still had to make it to the airport in the morning because all the wrestlers were flying back home. I didn't want to miss my return flight. When I got to the airport, as you might imagined, I looked horrific. And without ever saying a word to me, Dan just went up to the check-in counter, used his frequent flyer miles, and got my coach seat changed to a first-class seat so I would be more comfortable for the journey home. And he never came over and said a word about it to me. I didn't even know until I went up with my boarding pass to get in, and they said, "You've been moved into first class." And I was like, "What's going on here? Mike Quackenbush doesn't travel first class." And they said, "No, that gentleman over there took care of it for you." And he never even glanced up from his work. He was just busy taking care of the stuff Dan Severn has to take care of. That was such a generous and classy thing for a guy who was senior to me in the business to do. He didn't have to do it, and he wasn't doing it to be thanked. Years go by, and finally, I happened to bump into Dan in the lobby of a hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana. And he was just there having the continental breakfast. That's the same reason I was there. And so I pulled up a chair and I just said, "Dan, you know, blah, 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 this trip to Texas, yada, yada, yada. Do you remember that you took your frequent flyer miles and got me bumped up into first class? Because that meant the world to me that you did that." I tell that to everybody if they ever ask me, do I have any Dan Severn stories? I'm so thankful that you showed me that bit of kindness. And of course, you know, he had no memory of that whatsoever. It was like it never even happened. My experience that no matter who it is big-leaguing another, whether it is a genuine superstar or it is someone who imagines themselves to be a superstar, it makes no difference. This is rude and it's unprofessional. And of course, I did take care there to add in the distinction, people who imagine themselves to be superstars. This is the phenomenon I think of as a big fish in a little pond. You know what I mean by that? Here's an example of a big fish in a little pond. Let's say that I am the longest tenured veteran wrestler in the country of Liechtenstein. You know Liechtenstein, right? It's that little one sandwiched in between Austria and Switzerland, and it has produced absolutely no professional wrestlers of any note whatsoever. Spare me your Cedric Von Hausen remarks down in the comments, please. So imagine that's me. I'm the grizzled old vet of the Liechtenstein circuit. And I walk around acting like I'm Dwayne Johnson because I've been around the longest, I've done the most in this very small pond. And I treat the other wrestlers with disdain. I ignore them. Who did you ever beat? Were you ever in the Prince of Liechtenstein Cup? Did you even know that was the biggest tournament on Channel 4 back in the 70s? That's what it means to be a big fish in a little pond. In some narrow context, you might be a big deal. But in a bigger context, in the big pond, you would not be a big fish. No star from Liechtenstein ever has been. Of the handful of times I've been big leagued in pro wrestling locker rooms, the majority have been big fish in little pond scenarios. It hasn't actually been a true bona fide legend or superstar of wrestling blowing me off or ignoring me. It's just that these people, they stay in these small ponds that make them feel big by comparison, when in reality, they're just another journeyman, just another working pro out there taking the bumps and making the towns. But they will carry themselves in the locker room as if they were John Cena or Kenta Kobashi, even though they aren't. So, what do? What do you do when this happens to you? When someone big leagues you, they ignore you, they blow you off, they disrespect you. You could chase after them, start yelling at them, cause a scene, maybe even start a fight. But that's an overreaction. And if you succeeded in starting a fight in the locker room, regardless of whether you win or you lose, you take some lumps, you end up in an ambulance, no matter what, you're going to get fired for doing it. It is an overreaction that you will grow to regret. And take it from a guy who's had a laundry list of embarrassing overreactions in his career. You will regret it. My tactic has always been, in these situations, wait a good amount of time. Not 15 minutes, not 30 minutes, a good amount of time. So if it happened before the show begins, wait until their match is over and look for an opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation. And at that time, then make a second approach to say hello, introduce yourself, or whatever it is that went afoul earlier on in the day. And here's why I've found success with that. In the moment, anyone can be a jerk, and big leaguing another wrestler, that is a jerk move. But we have no way of knowing what's going on with someone else. Maybe they just got out of a heated argument with their significant other and hung up the call a moment before you went up to try and introduce yourself or say hello. Maybe they got called into a closed-door meeting where a business deal they were hoping to finish blew up in their face. Maybe the booker just told them their angle for the night has been canceled and they're feeling grumpy about it. These are things we have no way of knowing nor controlling. But to try and judge someone entirely by their behavior in one moment, whether that person is a big superstar, a bona fide legend in wrestling, a big fish in a small pond, or just another working pro, that's foolhardy. If I saw you having a jerkish moment with someone, would it be a fair assessment then to assume you must be a big jerk to everyone under all conditions everywhere that you go? No, that's probably not a fair assessment, right? That's why I just wait a while. If something's gone wrong, I just need to back off. I don't want to engage. I don't want to put myself in the middle of that in any way, shape, or form. I want to let whatever is happening with them pass. And I can tell you from my own experience doing this, every time I've made the effort to go and re-engage an hour or two later, the results have always been cordial and professional. To get the right result, all I had to be was patient. It's no fun getting ignored, being blown off. No one likes getting big leagued. I don't. But I also know what it is to be so busy on the day of a wrestling event, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I know what it is to come out of a heated conversation or meeting unable to rein in those really extreme emotions, and I just need to make some time and some space for myself so that I can decompress and come down off of that emotional peak. And the plain and simple truth is, no one is a jerk 24/7. You couldn't keep it up if you tried. It's too exhausting. And even when I've been a big jerk to people, am I a big jerk all the time, always? No, I'm not. When I'm in that state of mind, I just need to go and get my head screwed back on straight so I can get back to work or get back to life. And maybe hearing all of this doesn't reduce the sting you might feel if you get big leagued by someone, especially in front of a full locker room. I know it can be embarrassing, but you can end that whole interaction before you head home for the night on a positive note, if you're willing to be patient and you can demonstrate what a great locker room diplomat you are. So, getting big leagued is no one's favorite, but there are lots of other things which can go wrong when you're living the pro wrestling lifestyle. So please allow me to share with you some expert hacks. Let's not bury the lead. Up first, what do you do when the finish to your match gets botched? The truth is, there are two answers to this one. So if you're working somewhere where the referee has an earpiece and is getting constant feedback from the people at Gorilla or the people in the production truck, after you botch whatever the finish is, just sell and wait for instructions from backstage, because they might tell you to just get up and run the finish a second time because they know they can fix it in post-production. If you're in that exact scenario, remember to orient the spot wherever it had been in the ring. For example, if the finish was a superplex off the northeast turnbuckle, make sure that when you repeat it, you climb the northeast turnbuckle and do it there. Don't change the positioning in the ring or it won't line up in post-production. If you're working somewhere where the referee is not getting instructions from Gorilla or from the backstage area, my advice to you is do not repeat the spot. Find something else that achieves the goal that was given to you by the booker. So if the goal was the heel goes over by disqualification, you find another way to get to it. If the finish is meant to be the babyface goes over with a flash pin, find a different way to do it. But don't repeat the thing you just botched. What do you do when your entrance music doesn't play? Unless you can see what's happening at music, follow my 5 Dave Batista rule. You're going to count to 5. 1 Dave Batista, 2 Dave Batista, 3 Dave Batista. And if you make it to 5 and that music's not playing, you're going to walk through the curtain and act like this is how it's supposed to be, no matter what. Up third, what do you do when you are sent to the ring in front of a live audience to cut a promo that is only to fill time? If the crowd's already in and you're just filling time because somebody's flight was delayed or the next match isn't ready to go on just yet, rely on this old trick. If you are a face, you're going to talk about everybody on the heel side of the equation. Vice versa. If you're a heel, you're going to talk about every single baby face on the roster and start from the bottom of the card and work your way all the way up to the champion. Take a moment to call out what each character's value is. Here's somebody I would love to face because they have amazing acrobatic skill. And then put yourself over. But I know I could beat them because nobody ever escapes my clever submission finishing move or whatever. Take the time to mention everybody and then put yourself over after you name their value. This accomplishes a number of things, especially if you put the champion last. It makes your ultimate goal clear to the audience. I'm chasing that championship belt. It also helps get over anybody lower on the card than you are by you bringing them up in the conversation, making the audience realize these matchups are potential. It excites intrigue. And if you happen to be the champion of the company in this position, just consider them all challengers. And when putting yourself over, talk about why you'll beat them all and why you're going to retire with that belt. What do you do when the ropes break in the middle of your match? If a turnbuckle gets stripped, the come-along breaks, the cross cables become detached, and the ropes lose all their tension, immediately cut all rope and all corner spots out of the rest of your match. And if the finish that you are working toward necessitates their use, like for example, you were expecting to go home on a shooting star press from the top turnbuckle, check in with your opponent. Hey, can you run the shooting star press from a standing position? If that's not possible, you're going to need to choose a new finish. Consider the ropes and the corners to be out of play. What do you do when your opponent gets hurt while you are performing in the ring and it is clear what that injury is? You are going to choose a finish from a different zone of the body. So, if your opponent has just broken their ankle and it's plain as day, put the Jujigatame on their arm and let them tap out from an arm submission. But go home directly on a part of the body that's far removed from where that injury just happened. Important follow-up. What do you do when your opponent is injured while you are performing in the ring, but you cannot tell what the injury is? If you don't know what the injury is, do not touch your opponent. If your opponent happens to be outside the ring when this occurs, tell the ref to count them out as fast as possible and signal for help from the back. If the injury happens in the ring, instruct the referee to throw up the X. You're going to hit the floor and take the count out lost. Go right to the back and let everybody know that there's an injury in the ring, but it's not clear what that injury is. What do you do when you miss your flight to your booking? Go directly to the service desk for the airline you were booked on and explain the situation, and then get out your credit card. If you miss the flight, it's on you. So get ready to pay, in a best case scenario, a change fee to that flight. In a worst case scenario, you're buying yourself a ticket on the next departing flight, so you still make your booking. What do you do when your match goes home way too early? And I don't mean like 30 or 60 seconds early. I mean like 12 or 15 minutes too early. What about that one? What do you do? This exact thing has happened to me a couple times throughout the years. Most recently, when I was wrestling up in Winnipeg just a few years ago, the match went home way too early, maybe 10 minutes left on the clock. So if this ever happens to you, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna get on the microphone and explain that something wasn't exactly right. My shoulder was up before the 3 count, this wasn't quite fair, whatever makes sense for your character. And then challenge your opponent to make it a best 2 out of 3 falls match. If it's against a babyface, well, the babyface should want competition. They're game to go. Yeah, let's do it. If it's a heel, the heel is so confident because they have already won one of the falls. They know they could keep on beating you all night long. They're going to accept. Either way, use the balance of the time to make up those 2 falls. Just be certain that the finish is what it's meant to be. If this character is supposed to go over with their submission hold at the end, find a way to get to that at the end of the 3rd fall, no matter what, and problem solved. Have any of these ever happened to you, by the way? Let me know down below in the comments. Tell me the story. I want to know. Okay, what do you do when the canvas rips while you are wrestling? You're going to go home as quickly as possible. Do not chance someone's foot getting snagged in that rip on the canvas and a serious injury occurring. Injury aside, some tears in a canvas can be stitched or patched if you get to them before they get too bad. But once that rip goes all the way across the canvas, somebody's out $400. What do you do when focus is being pulled away from the ring? Because there's a production snafu happening over at the entranceway, there's a fight in the stands, etc. What do you do? If you sense focus has been pulled away from the ring, grab a hold and sit still until you know that the attention has come back. And if you can't see exactly what's going on, ask the ref to be your eyes in that scenario, and then just hang tight until everyone's focus is back on you. Number 11. What do you do when your gear is lost and you have to wrestle in your street clothes. There's no way you're going to hide this from the audience, so you've only got two options in my experience. Number one, you're going to get the match changed in advance to a street fight, and your opponent, they're going to wrestle in their street clothes too. If that's not an option, you're going to go on earlier than scheduled. Just make sure that all the right people have signed off on that before you do it. Send your opponent out to the ring first. They're going to start cutting this incendiary promo, and you're going to come out in your street clothes to answer them, and it's going to seg directly into the match to justify you not being in your gear. What do you do when you get that urgent call about an international booking and then you discover your passport is expired? It kinda depends. If the tour departs in less than 5 days, you're going to have to tell them your passport has expired. You can't take advantage of this opportunity. But if you've got at least 5 business days before you'd have to get on the plane, you're going to look up a passport expediter near you, pay whatever the fee is, and make sure it's taken care of so that you don't miss out on that overseas tour. Okay, try this one on for size. What do you do if a contact lens, piece of gum, a blade, your muffler falls out onto the mat while you're wrestling? What do? You are going to put this loose object between you and the referee and then clamp a hold on your opponent down on the mat. When the referee comes down to check for a submission, smarten them up as to what happens to be loose and let them know to very discreetly scoop it right up off the mat before everything comes back up and the match resumes. Living and loving pro wrestling means inevitably having to deal with fans, which is why I think you need to see this. To begin, I want to share with you a few real examples of interactions that I've had or some of my proteges have had through the years. And I want to make it clear to you where I stand on each of these. But ultimately, it will be up to you to decide where your boundaries lie. I'm just going to share my insight and experience with you to help inform your own decision. Let's start today with something really obvious and we'll work our way toward subtler material as we go, okay? So this first one might already be familiar to you if you are a masked wrestler and a fan approaches you seeking a photo of you without your mask on or some other kind of interaction which will essentially reveal your identity, basically shattering the mystique of your character. I'm of the opinion that all such requests are met with a hard no big shoots. There will always be fans out there that want a peek behind the curtain. They want the gimmick of the magic trick revealed to them, so to speak. And that's a natural, very human curiosity to have. It's not necessarily malicious. However, the anonymity of your mask bestows upon you a mystique, which, once shattered, can never be recovered. In addition to which, a lot of the traditions around wrestling masked come to us from lucha libre. And yeah, there are some wrestling traditions out there which I think should be upheld and honored, and this is one of them. I believe until the moment you are officially unmasked in the ring, no fan gets to see your face. That moment deserves to be protected. Along these same lines is an example that I am very familiar with. You might be too. Now, you might know that over the last 20 years or so, I've written a bunch of books. And this scenario I'm going to describe to you occurs most frequently when I am signing books. A fan will lean in real close and whisper to me, "Can you sign your real name?" Probably not a surprise here. This is also a hard no, Super Chief. You know what? Let me just take a quick look here on the title page and see who the author of this book is. Oh, it says Mike Quackenbush. So let me autograph that for you as Mike Quackenbush, the person who wrote the book. More times than not, I am met with this sort of request by a fan who is seeking status. You know what I mean by that? They want to end up with an item or collectible which is special or different from what other fans have so that it confers upon them a certain status within fandom. And it really doesn't matter to me why they are asking for it. The answer is going to be the same. And I don't care if they are willing to pay a bit extra for that. My standards don't change based on that. It's still a no. Now, having said as much, I think it's worth mentioning that every once and again, you're going to be met with a fan who says something out of left field. It may catch you off guard. Not because they are being malicious and not because they are necessarily seeking some kind of status, but because they are genuinely starstruck in that moment. They might have imagined or dreamed about what it would be like to meet you, and when they finally get that opportunity, they are flustered. You will see it. The expression on their face reveals as much to you, and they might be having a very difficult time fully expressing themselves in that moment because they are legitimately starstruck. And in those moments, sometimes something wild and crazy does tumble out of their mouths. But bear that in mind that every once and again, you're going to be in for an interaction just like that. And if a fan is having a genuine moment, I always try and regard that entire interaction with a greater degree of compassion. I've also been on the flip side of that equation. I'm a devout, lifelong fan of They Might Be Giants. And at the nucleus of that band are two guys, John Linnell and John Flansburgh. And once, many moons ago, when I saw them live in concert at the Chameleon Club out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, at the end of the show, John Flansburgh put his guitar down and just leapt into the crowd and started shaking people's hands and asking them if they liked the concert. And I was so starstruck in that moment that my speech impediment resurfaced full blown, and whatever was coming out of my mouth was completely unintelligible to him in that moment. And he could have chosen to be very rude, short with me, and move on, but he didn't. He took a moment to stand there, shake my hand, try to listen to what I was saying, and did so with a lot of compassion and gratitude. And that interaction was so meaningful, I remember it like it was yesterday, even though in reality, it was almost 20 years ago. One more point I want to share with you along these lines. I don't owe anyone an autograph. And you know what? Neither do you. And yeah, that does include meet and greet situations where someone has prepaid and then queued up in line to meet you. Details of personalizing or inscribing your 8x10 photo are yours to decide. You have the freedom to decide what you will and will not do, just like you have the freedom to have a customer issued a refund and be sent on their way. And I know that sometimes that gets a bit sticky if a fan turns cranky or temperamental while they are in your line. But even if they're pitching a fit, that does not mean you must indulge them. On the whole, fans are far more entitled now than they were back in the 90s or in the 00s because social media has reduced the barrier to access. People that we used to glimpse maybe once in a lifetime now post their gym selfies every day. They might even like what their fans are posting. There is an imagined sense of proximity, and that has bred a sense of entitlement like never before. There really are fans who feel as if they are entitled to access. They're entitled to full disclosure or transparency, and they are not. I think one of, if not the single biggest negative of the social media era of professional wrestling is this heightened sense of fan entitlement, because nothing like this existed in any of the three previous eras of professional wrestling. One other thing related to boundaries that we need to discuss is taking photos with fans. And again, I appreciate this is the sort of thing they might prepay for and spend time in a line waiting to get. But no matter what the circumstances may be, that doesn't mean that if a fan comes up to you and says, "You're my favorite wrestler, can I have a big hug?" that they are entitled to that. No, they are not. Not if that makes you uncomfortable. Is a fan owed the opportunity to put their arm around your waist and give you a squeeze? No, they are not. Not if that makes you uncomfortable. It's up to you to decide what is and is not permitted, regardless of what a Wrestler One merch table away happens to be offering. To this end, I think it's really important to be straightforward with whoever is assisting you at the meet and greet or whoever is helping run your merch table about what is and is not acceptable. And if they supply on-site security, it's worth bringing these concerns to their attention as well, so that you have a team of people around you that will help to maintain your boundary. And if for any reason you feel like they will fail to help you enforce this, well, I'm going to share with you an example that I gleaned outside the world of wrestling that worked beautifully. About 11 or 12 years ago, I went to a convention on Arch Street in Philadelphia for a chance to meet the Batman I grew up with, Adam West. He was doing a meet and greet there. And at the point that you got in line to meet him, there was a sign posted that simply read, "Please do not shake Adam's hand." Now, do I know why I wasn't supposed to shake Adam West's hand? No. Maybe he had a cold and didn't want to spread his germs to us. Maybe his hand was injured and it would cause him pain if you grabbed his hand. Or maybe at some past point, a fan did shake his hand and it was gross and that guy ruined it for all the rest of us. But regardless of what the exact circumstance was, did this make Adam West a heel to all of his fans? No. I still got in line to meet him, and so did about 600 other people that morning. There's one last point about the boundary between pro wrestling performers and our audience that I want to share with you. If you are seeing a fellow performer struggling, they are having a hard time, they are being put in an uncomfortable situation, and you see this because they're right next to you at a meet and greet, or maybe they are sharing a merch table at intermission with you, make the save. Do the run-in here. If a fan is acting inappropriately or making an out-of-bounds request and you see this performer is really having a hard time managing that situation, don't be afraid to speak up and say something like, "Hey man, that's not acceptable here. Get it together or move on." If you gotta draw that line in the sand and you're not especially confident in your submission holds, well, maybe summon security to help sort things out. But don't leave a fellow wrestler just twisting in the wind while one of these uncomfortable scenarios plays out. So much of being a pro wrestler is learned, not in the ring, but in the locker room, or on long car rides to events, or late at night at the diner. There are so many unwritten traditions and rules, some of which are quite odd. And please allow me to share them with you now. I got 10 of them to talk about. Let's start with number 1. Starting with the one I like best. This is the one I hope rallies a bit and starts to make a bit of a comeback in pro wrestling. It's that you always thank your opponent during the finish. As you are pinning them, while the 3 is being counted, you thank your opponent for the match. I think this is a great gesture, a show of gratitude and professionalism. And I don't know when this started disappearing out of wrestling, but I would love to see it make a comeback. Second one is so old, it's got to be a holdover from the carnival era of professional wrestling. And the first guy to ever really mentor me in the business taught it to me. When you are going out for your match, you take all the cash that you brought with you and you put it in your boot so that no one can thief it out of your bag or your wallet while you're out performing. That definitely sounds like a tenet from the carnival era of wrestling. The big joke, of course, was that you would always know which bills are yours because they smell like your socks. Stay in position. All right, here we go. In my experience, this one is the least obscure of the unwritten rules we're covering in today's video. It's that on road trips, the shotgun seat is always for the veteran, the senior-most performer in the car. This is never discussed, it's just understood. And it's not one of those things where the vet has to, as we often say, pull their vet card out to prove they get the shotgun seat. It is done as a show of respect for their years of service to the craft. You leave the shotgun seat vacant for the senior-most wrestler in that car. Although I don't know for sure, I believe that this next one is rooted in the cable TV era of wrestling. And it's something I only ever heard about after that whole era had ended. It's that TV guys tip their enhancement workers. If someone's coming in to be squashed by you to enhance and elevate your character on TV, after that match, you tip them. You give them money. The idea being that the featured superstar on TV is making so much money, while the enhancement talent is being paid, comparatively very little to that amount of money. And because quite frequently, the enhancement guys would get roughed up for the sake of making an effective squash match, you showed your gratitude for that extra work, those extra bumps, those rough chops you gave them for the sake of the TV cameras. You tipped them. That one, like I said, pretty obscure. Have you ever heard of it before? Let me know down below in the comments, and also where you heard it. I think that one's a really weird one, but kind of cool. The next two on my list are closely related. They're both about locker room behavior, and one of them is certainly more modern than the other. The more modern of them is this one. There is no texting in the locker room whatsoever. People with their phones out who are texting are likely to be suspected of leaking backstage information to someone who's out front of house, or potentially to someone in an AOL chat room. You can't have that. Now, of course, this one has really faded quickly since the whole mobile revolution has changed the way we interact as a society. But in the early days of phones that could text, it was taboo to be seen texting on your phone. Believe it or not. The other of these pertaining to locker room behavior might be an unwritten rule of wrestling, but it did not go unspoken in the course of my career. I learned it very loudly from an irate King Kong Bundy way back in the 90s. Your roller bag or travel case does not go up on a table in the locker room. Tables are kept clear because if a worker got hurt in the ring and had to be hustled backstage for medical attention, you would need that table space to be clear for them to lay down. You would never ask another worker to lay on the dirty floor. So put your travel cases down on the floor and keep the tabletops clear. The next two I've got for you pertain to merchandise. At least one of them dates back to the late territory era of wrestling. I know I've been throwing a lot of those eras around. Real quick, there are 4 eras of wrestling. Carnival era, territory era, cable TV era, social media era is the one that we are in as I record this video for you. So, pertaining to merchandise, up first, you don't sell your merchandise until after your match because you haven't earned those dollars yet. Prove to the fans that they are worthy of their fandom by giving them a great match. And then and only then are you able to go and sell your merchandise. If you haven't proven that you're a commodity in the ring yet, you haven't earned the opportunity to sell your merch. And the other one in this category is bound to shock and appall pro wrestlers whose experience is uniquely confined to the social media era of wrestling. It's this. After the show is over, babyfaces give half their merchandise profit to the heel they worked with in the ring because heels do not sell merchandise. Now, as you can imagine, there was an era in wrestling where heels did not go out in front of the crowd to sign autographs, certainly not to take selfies, or to try and sell merchandise. They were hated and despised everywhere they went. They were effective villains. But because they didn't have that revenue stream open to them, a measure of balancing everything out post-show was that the babyface would give a portion of the profits from their merch sales to the heel they had worked with. So the harder the heel worked to get the babyface over and help boost their merch sales in that particular town, they reaped a benefit for their hard work, taking into consideration heels did not sell merchandise. Sadly, this next one is tumbling into obscurity a little bit more with each passing day. And that's due in part to the fact that it's been usurped in the wrestling lexicon by the often misunderstood concept of protect your brand. The old school concept I'm talking about is called showing ass. And this refers to the willingness of one wrestler to look foolish in front of the audience for the sake of making their opponent. That is to say, they are willing to play the part of the jackass, even if that gets a laugh out of the crowd. And they do this for the sake of helping to elevate whoever they are working with. This concept disappears from wrestling a little bit more every day, but it desperately needs to make a comeback. And there are fewer and fewer performers at the very top of the industry who seem to understand its value. And the last one on my list is very much beholden to the tenets of kayfabe 1.0. It's this. It's selling all the way to the next town. Have you ever heard of this before? If your leg got worked over in your match tonight, when you're out at the gas station filling up your rental car, you better be selling that leg. You're at the diner post-show, you better be selling that leg. You're checking in that night at the Holiday Inn Express, you better be selling that leg. You're going to sell it all the way to the next town. You're going to keep the kayfabe of wrestling alive by not discarding the work that you just put on in front of the paying customers in the off chance that one of them might spot you once the event is all over. And since I'm digging deep in my bag of veteran tricks for you today, how about we go over some names that you do not want to be called in the locker room? Now, I want to talk about the 16 things you never want to be called in the locker room. And I'm going to start with the one that resonates most deeply with me, because this was most definitely the thing no one wanted to be called back when I was breaking into wrestling in the 90s. Here we go. Back in the day, I dreaded being called a once-a-monther, and this is more or less synonymous with weekend warrior. It means that you aren't talented enough to get more work. It might also imply that you are a hobbyist, that you aren't attempting to make professional wrestling your true vocation, and that somehow makes you less than. Once-a-monther has faded from fashion. I don't think I've even heard that in the last 10 years. Like any type of slang or lingo, well, it's constantly evolving and changing to fit the times. And even weekend warrior has kind of fallen out of favor, because the reality is, unless you're playing at the corporate level, the vast majority of your work is going to be on the weekends. This is one of the most intriguing on my entire list, because when I was starting out, this was considered a compliment, and along the way, across the decades, I have watched as this has devolved into an insult. It's being called a good or solid hand in the ring. If someone were to summarize your talent by saying, you're a good hand, you're a solid hand in the ring, many years ago, this was seen as a compliment. It meant that you were an accomplished and versatile pro. But it has changed, like all slang or lingo does over the years. And now, this is widely considered an insult. It is meant to imply you have no star potential. The most you'll ever be is adequate. It might imply you've already hit your ceiling. This is as far as you're gonna go if you're a solid hand. Before I go any further, would you leave a like on today's video? It's one of the key engagement metrics that YouTube looks at when deciding, should we give a channel a big push? I would like the big push. Will you leave me a like-a-palooza? I'd appreciate it. One thing you do not want to be called in a pro wrestling locker room is a brick or a brick wall. This is what luchadors refer to as cemento. And that means your work is kind of stiff, maybe even super stiff. And if in addition to your work being stiff, you are difficult to work with in the ring, you might be labeled a crowbar as well, which has nothing to do with WCW wrestler Crowbar, who is longtime journeyman Devon Storm. He's not a crowbar. He's called Crowbar. He's great. Miss you, buddy. A time-tested slur of professional wrestling is to refer to someone as a sandbag. Now, predominantly, this means that they are not good at making themselves light in the ring, but it might also mean they are unskilled at posting, which is a necessary skill to possess for the smooth performance of a lot of basic wrestling throws. The implication of a sandbag is that they're tough to move around the ring, similar to a crowbar or a brick wall. And it might also imply that they hit like a brick. That sounds like a real fun day at the office to me. If they're tough to move around, especially to lift, sometimes you hear this called a stump, which is what Italian wrestlers call ceppo. I'm putting together these three insults because they all convey the exact same message when they're spoken aloud in the locker room. They are nice guy, sweetheart, and variations on bless their heart. So if you were to hear someone being described like, he's a nice guy, she's a sweetheart, oh, bless their heart, it all means the exact same thing. It means they're a lousy in-ring worker. When I was talking to people about pro wrestling slurs that they've heard in locker rooms, I heard the greatest variety around this same general concept, the idea of being the hometown hero. I heard terms like the 40-miler, the 20-miler, the 5-mile vet. And all of these mean the same thing, roughly. It's that this person can't get booked outside of their hometown. That's all the value that they have. But it could also imply they're unambitious or they're bad at networking. If they had more ambition, if they were better at networking, they'd be able to escape the gravitational pull of their hometown, but they can't find bookings more than 20 miles out. They can't get booked outside of a 5-mile radius. They are a hometown hero, and it is not meant lovingly. It is definitely an insult. A pro wrestling slur I've heard fall from fashion over the last 20 years is being a bleeder. And this is an insult levied against a wrestler when the only value they can add to the show is spilling some blood in the ring. They are essentially a one-note act. And the term that pairs with has also sort of fallen from favor in recent decades, that being vampires. Vampires is an insult levied against an audience that craves blood and guts on the show more so than good wrestling, as subjective as that idea might be. This next unflattering term is so old, I practically forgot all about it. You would not want to be called a butcher, as in someone who chops raw meat. A butcher is a wrestler who just chops and punches their way through matches. They seem to possess no technical wrestling skill. They seem incapable of running spots. They just punch and chop their way through the entire match. And this pretty old school insult reminded me of another job-related one, being a carpenter. But a carpenter is a compliment. This used to be something you wanted to hear. I don't think people say it at all anymore, but you used to want to be called a carpenter. It meant you could build a good match with anyone. So, quick summary here: butcher bad, carpenter good. This next one rose to prominence during the Monday Night Wars era, and it's something I heard a whole heck of a lot of back in the day, because I was often called a spot monkey. This insult means that you are overly dependent on the spots that you've called in the back, or for lack of a more elegant term, you are reliant on your choreography. you are unable to go to the ring and make it all up in the moment. You're unable to improvise, to walk and talk a match live as it's happening. You may not be able to listen to the input from the audience and then synthesize that, choosing what to show them, what not to show them, and putting it into the match on the fly. A spot monkey, at least in the minds of people who wield that as if it is a slur, believe you're little more than a trained circus animal. You do your little routine the way you've always practiced it, regardless of what the audience wants to see. That's what it means to be a spot monkey. This next one genuinely surprised me, but it is heavily regionalized. I started out my career in the northeastern United States, and what I noticed about this particular slur is that I heard it from wrestlers in the South, no further west than Texas. It's being called a carny, a dirty carny, or a lazy carny, taken from the term for a carnival worker. But what it means is a wrestler who takes no big bumps during a match and has no flashy moves. They rely solely on crowd work or other gimmickry to get a reaction out of the audience, like letting the audience see that you have a foreign object while the referee's back is turned and then hiding it somewhere and waiting for the audience to react, to try and smarten up the referee, but by the time the referee's caught on to where it had been hidden, you've already moved it to a new location, and milking this for minutes and minutes of your allotted time. That's what it means to be a carny, lazy carny, dirty carny, is that you get by with the bare minimum of wrestling to fill your allotted time on the card. This next insult remains popular to this day. It's been around for decades now. You don't want to be called a backyarder, sometimes just shortened to yarder in wrestling locker rooms. Because what's meant by that is that you seem to have no credible training whatsoever. It can also be a reprisal of someone's gear, that they have homemade, tattered, or otherwise unimpressive gear that doesn't seem to have been made by a professional gear maker. It's definitely meant to imply that you do not understand elements of performance or structure. You maybe understand wrestling moves, and that's about as far as you've evolved as a performer. That's what it means when someone else calls you a yarder. This next one sure has morphed a lot over the years, so listen carefully. When I was first breaking into wrestling back in the 90s, it was a fairly mild insult to be called a juice freak. It meant that your physique was not obtained through clean or natural methods. You were using a performance enhancer of some kind to obtain the physique that you had. But when I was coming into wrestling, that was fairly acceptable. It was really quite commonplace. But attitudes toward that have changed over the years. And being called a juice freak became more and more of an insult as time went by, to the point that it has evolved into something else entirely. I don't even hear that term used anymore. When people are trying to levy that insult, what is most commonly said now is they have $1 million body or $1 million look, full stop. There are no further qualifiers thereafter. And this comes with a new added wrinkle. If someone were to say, he's got $1 million body, they've got $1 million look, what's meant by that is they are a physique only. They've got a body, they look like they are a professional wrestler, but they have none of the other skills necessary to do the job. It's definitely an insult. Found in the same corner of the vault of pro wrestling insults are these. A bowl of cornflakes, sometimes simply shortened to cornflakes or vanilla. This is levied against a wrestler who has no charisma about them. It could be said they are as bland as a bowl of cornflakes. Steak is an insult I never heard before I was doing research for this exact episode, and it seems to trace back to Pete Gass's days in Ohio Valley Wrestling. Steak means cringy. Your taste in wrestling could be cringy. Your gear could be cringy. Could be used like this. That go-home promo you cut for the show was pretty steep. British wrestlers well-versed in Cockney rhyming slang, they seem to have an entire dictionary of insults and slurs all their own. I'm going to share just one with you now. Being described as red reels of cotton means you are rotten in the ring. That's the rhyme, cotton to rotten. Sometimes it's just shortened down to red reels. Shout out to Johnny Kidd for sharing that one with me, who is every bit as talented in the ring as he is lovely in real life. You're a gem, mate. A wrestling insult increasingly popular here in North America, and something no one wants to be called, is a video game wrestler. And this means that you seem to have no storytelling ability whatsoever. You don't understand performance. You don't understand match structure. The best you are capable of is a random pile of moves, and one of them happens to be the last in the sequence. The longer you do this, the more tips and tricks you're going to learn. What do you do when your bootlaces are too long? How do you prevent your face paint from ruining the canvas on the ring? Well, I want to share a few of my very favorites with you now. This first one is one I've seen way too many rookies struggling with. It has to do with how you lace up your boots. And you know bootlaces come in all different lengths. You might be in a position where you can hit every eyelet coming up your boot, and then you still end up with 2 feet of lace at the very top. Well, if you've got too much boot lace for your boots, do an extra lap around your calf muscle and then tie it off in front so you don't end up with this giant bow hanging out of your boots, which looks kind of goofy. This second hack is so old, it's new again. I first heard this almost 29 years ago. If you are struggling to remember one key part of a spot, every time you call it back, every time you're working with your opponent, you keep forgetting the same thing, write one keyword to jar your memory on your wrist tape. So if you can remember that you get Bandera'd out of the ring and you slingshot yourself in over the top rope into a 3/4 roll and you catch a kick, but you can't remember dragon screw, write the word dragon on your wrist tape. It will have no greater significance to anyone if they could even see it. But the act of doing that alone might be enough to cement it in your memory. And if that's not enough, don't worry, it'll be right where you left it. Hack number 3 isn't one of mine. Shout out to Max Smashmaster for the help on this one. If you wear face paint in the ring and it keeps smudging when you perform so that you look like a sad mime that's been out in the rain too long, you need to switch from an oil-based or grease paint to an acrylic. Get glossy acrylic paint, and what you might notice is from time to time it will flake off, but it won't smudge or stain your gear or the canvas of the ring in which you are performing. Hack number 4? No. Could have fit into my video about veteran advice I wish I had heard earlier in my career. It's this. As soon as you are done making your rounds, saying hello and shaking hands and introducing yourself to everyone, start gearing up. Don't wait, because you never know when you might get shifted into curtain jerker position. If you're going out first, you've got to be prepared. And if nothing else, it shows to whomever is in charge that you are professional. You are ready to go to work. Someone that isn't geared up isn't ready to go to work. And if something were to arise that required someone to go to the ring to cut a promo, or their match had to move from being in position 6 to position 1, you would be adequately prepared because you're already geared up. Whereas someone who is not, isn't ready to go to work. If you're relatively new to wrestling, this is something we aren't talking about enough, so listen up. If you are performing in a battle royal or some big brawl like a pull apart, don't cock your arm back outside of your field of vision, because the moment that you do, you will invariably throw some unexpected elbow into somebody's unsuspecting skull. You've got to restrict any strikes you throw to your full field of vision so that everybody stays safe. This one's from my personal playbook. Hack number 6, no. is for those of you out there plagued by cotton mouth while you are wrestling. Your mouth gets so dried out that you can't rehydrate it, and you need something to stimulate your salivary glands. If you need to have an extra piece of gum at the ready to do just that, give it to the ref beforehand and then just have them pass it to you when you need it during the match. Do not attempt to secrete it in your wrist tape or in the lining of your trunks or down in your boot, because when you need it, you're never going to be able to fish it out. You just won't. Take it from a guy who had to find this out the hard way. You will not find it when you need it, but you will find it later after it's been made warm and is sticking to all kinds of things you wish it weren't. Number 7 is one I've learned traveling the highways and byways of the independent circuit. If you know you are going to a venue without a proper locker room, gear up before you leave home. Gear up before you even begin the trip, because changing into your gear in your car in the parking lot outside the venue is a recipe for an awkward fan interaction you wish had never happened. Don't chance it. Gear up at home and then put on a tracksuit or a set of sweats and do the drive to the venue. You're going to show up ready to go. Quick bonus one, kind of related to that last one, but I had to stick this one in here for you. If you're going to a venue with a notoriously small locker room, you can become the hero of the roster by recommending that after everyone is dressed, you take all those big roller bags and you're going to make a tower out of them in one corner of the room. Just stack them as high as possible. Put the hard shell ones on the bottom, the not so hard shell ones on top, and you'll create all this additional floor space inside that tight little locker room. This next hack is for those of you out there who perform in a mask. Number 8 is this. If your mask has a tendency to slide around on your head, no matter how tight you tie your laces, then you need to build into the way you sell something that organically allows you to touch the mask. Maybe it's the way that you clutch your head or neck when you're on the cell, and you're going to use that to disguise the fact that you are adjusting your mask so that you can see and breathe freely. It's dangerous to be performing in a mask if it's askew and you are partially blinded, right? Of course it is. But you don't want to shatter the illusion of conflict by stopping what you're doing for the sake of fixing your mask. So build it into the selling that you are already doing. When you don't, and you're constantly fidgeting with your mask, well, it, at worst, makes it seem like you're a nervous rookie who doesn't know what they're doing. At best, you seem like someone who bought an off-the-rack suit several sizes too big for them, and neither of these are especially desirable results. Because this is the internet, someone will find this shocking. But here we go. Are you one of those wrestlers who pees a little bit when they get kicked in the stomach or take a particularly spicy senton right to the midsection? If that sounds like you, I got a hack for you. Way back in the 90s, I was wrestling at the Flagstaff in Jim Thorpe, PA, and I saw a wrestler who shall remain nameless stand at the sink and splash water on their face, chest, and trunks while their music was playing. And I said, "What are you doing?" And they turned to me and said, "Sometimes I pee a little in my matches, and in case it happens tonight, no one will ever know." And then they ran to the ring. You can't make this stuff up, kids. And hack number 10 is undoubtedly the most mission critical of all, so listen up. When something goes wrong as you're performing your match live in the ring, shut things down by grabbing a hold. Don't slink back into your corner away from your opponent or take a powder and then think things over while making a lap around the ring. You can't communicate with your opponent in those situations. So grab a hold, work your way down to the mat, figure out where you're going next, and then get back on track. When things get a little askew or you forget what's coming next, grab a hold and don't resume until you know where the performance is headed. Across years of show-stealing matches and indelible memories that you will give to fans of your work, you will end up forging a legacy for yourself. But it is worthwhile to bring both intentionality and some self-awareness to that process. An enduring legacy requires longevity, lasting power. No flash in the pan leaves much of an enduring legacy behind. But no matter how long your career is, in professional wrestling or otherwise, it will be marked by seasons. And not all seasons are great triumphs. Yes, you will experience great success in some seasons of your career, and yet there are also going to be a couple seasons which are middling at best. They flirt with mediocrity, and you may even come across a few seasons which feel disastrous. I've had a couple of those myself. But having these seasons is a natural part of building a legacy because it speaks to your lasting power. It speaks to your longevity. But I want you to know, the legacy that you will build for yourself, it is so much more than championship title wins or tournament victories or classic main event matches. It is entirely possible to build a legacy that you can be proud of without any of those things. I'm going to get a bit personal here for a moment. Is it significant to me that I was a middleweight champion in Mexico? Yeah, sure it is. Does it matter to me at all that I won a tournament years ago in Essen, Germany? Yes, it does mean something to me. Does it mean anything to anybody else? Probably not. And ultimately, in the final analysis, things like tournament wins or championships held, they're going to mean a whole lot less to my legacy than things like all the books I've written on the topic of professional wrestling, all the people that I have trained and coached and mentored through the decades. Realistically, probably the work I'm doing right here, right now for Till We Make It. Those things will eclipse all of my in-ring accomplishments in the final analysis. And by the time I am dead and buried, those in-ring accomplishments will almost seem insignificant in comparison to those other things that I mentioned. In fact, it may not even have to wait that long. It probably already is right now. These things are more significant right now than anything I ever did in the ring. I shared those examples with you. I'm telling you these things for two reasons. And one is, as wrestlers, we tend to overemphasize the importance of our in-ring accomplishments when we are considering our legacies. And I'm not here to tell you those things aren't important, not at all. In fact, I hope your in-ring accomplishments, they fill you with pride and they give you a real sense of satisfaction when you reflect on them. Whether they are things you have already done in your career or things that you're going to be doing in the years and decades ahead, I want them to give you a sense of pride and of satisfaction. But helping you to craft a legacy you can be proud of, that is one of the three main reasons I started making videos for this channel. In fact, it's right there in the intro to every single video of mine. It says, the lifestyle, the legacy, the journey. And the second reason that I'm sharing these things with you today really speaks directly to the heart of this video. In order to build a legacy that you can be proud of, you must persist, you must evolve, and you must master. And I know that sounds really easy when I just say them like bullet points like that, but it isn't. Those things aren't easy to do. You must persist, you must evolve, and you must master, and you must leave a like-a-palooza on today's video. I should have asked for the engagement earlier, but I only got to it now. Help me out. Thanks very much. So yes, you must persist. And persistence, consistency means that you are not constantly flailing about, shifting gears, throwing anything at all against the wall to see if it sticks, and then abandoning it the moment that it doesn't. And I get it. We live in an age of distraction. It has never been easier to get distracted by the next shiny thing. And wrestling by its very nature is very, what have you done for me lately? But you need to demonstrate persistence. You have to keep showing up. You have to dig in your heels and do the hard work over the long term. Here's an example that immediately springs to my mind. A key part of Colt Cabana's legacy in wrestling will be his Art of Wrestling podcast. And if Colt lacked persistence, if he lacked consistency, well, then it would have been so easy for him to just give up that project when it was struggling to find an audience in its first few months. But instead, he continued to show up. He dug in his heels and he did the work over the long term. And now, here he is, some 400 plus podcasts later. The art of wrestling is practically an institution unto itself, and it may have ended up touching more people's lives in a significant way than any Colt Cabana match ever has. A theme that will recur as you build your legacy is that you must continue to persist and you must continue to evolve. You must continue to learn new things, to experiment, and then take the information, the data you get back from that experiment, synthesize it into your work and evolve into a new shape or form. And there are lots of working pros out there in wrestling right now who only ever get good at a select few things and they polish them up so they look great, and then they simply never deviate from those exact things. But here is my warning to you. When you stop evolving, not only are you not learning new things, but you are also nudging ever closer to becoming obsolete. That's why you can never stop evolving throughout the course of a career you want to be proud of. And in order to do that, you cannot stay strictly within the realm of what makes you comfortable. Your comfort zone can make you complacent. And to make sure this doesn't happen to you, every once and again, you're going to have to take on something new, learn some new skill, try something different, something that makes you just a little bit uncomfortable. It means you're going to take a step outside of your comfort zone. Because when we only do those things which make us perfectly comfortable at all times, we are not evolving. We are not challenging ourselves, not as professional wrestlers, not as people. You know you must persist, and you know you must evolve, and you must also master. And this one is really important, so listen carefully. Don't chase perfection. Chase mastery. Perfection is an impossible ideal, and you will make yourself crazy trying to chase perfection. Instead, seek mastery in every facet of your wrestling career. And as you achieve mastery, then start looking for new challenges. If you've already developed a reasonable mastery of in-ring mechanics, well then shift your focus to match structure. Or if you've already mastered that, shift your focus to promos. If you've already mastered how to book angles that deliver, then shift your focus to promotion or marketing. There is always something new to be learned in the world of professional wrestling. But as you take on those new directions and as you constantly set new goals for yourself, seek mastery, not perfection. When you make persistence, evolution, and mastery recurring themes in every season of your career, well, a few things end up happening. Number one is you get to experience the sweetness of fulfillment. You'll be able to look back on all the seasons of your career, the ones that seem successful, the ones which are kind of mid, and even the ones that might seem like flaming dumpster fires, but across all of them, because you never stopped persisting, evolving, or mastering, you will experience the sweetness of fulfillment, even if your career never makes you $1 million and never transforms you into a global superstar. And when this recurs over time, it provides you with longevity, that lasting power we talked about. And then something very unique does happen. Because if over the long term, through that longevity, you do get to experience time and time again the sweetness of fulfillment, the end result will be a career and a legacy that you can be proud of. If you're still with me at this point, you must really love the pro wrestling lifestyle, and I continue to explore it from a variety of angles in my interview series. The playlist appearing on screen right now includes conversations about topics from getting your in-ring gear designed to making sure you get enough protein in your diet to put some muscles on that frame of yours. Click on it so you can keep on learning, and I'll see you over there.